Thank you for joining me in today's podcast. It's a great podcast today, but it's a little lengthy. I hope not too bad. And I've titled this, Getting Our Feet Wet. We're going to take our reading right from Joshua 3, verse 13. And it says this, "The priests will carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth. As soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand like a wall." Now, we've heard about this before, didn't we? When Israel backs were up against the waters, and the Egyptian armies were going to come kill them or take them back, and Moses opened up the sea through God's power. Now, here's another instance that we're talking about the same thing. And if you read on verses 14 through 16, it says, "So the people left their camps to cross the Jordan, and the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. It was the harvest season. The Jordan was overflowing its banks. But as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the Ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above that point began backing up a great distance away at a town called Adam, which is near Zarethan. And the waters below that point flowed unto the Dead Sea until the riverbed was dry. Then all the people crossed over near the town of Jericho." Much to be said about this. What faith this must have taken to dare step into the fast-flowing runoff water during the springtime of the Jordan River with the ark. Now, you have to remember that this event occurred after they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and they lost a generation of people. Moses has already died. Joshua's in charge. I remember as a young kid, I tried crossing into the Poudre River once while holding onto a branch during one of our spring runoffs. I didn't realize the power of water. My cousins were around me, and as soon as the water swept me off my feet, they grabbed me and had to pull me back onto dry land. Of course, they called me names. That force of water was only above my ankles, almost reaching my leg calves, but it had more of a force than I ever imagined. That was a lesson well learned about the power of the flowing water. The Poudre River, as measured at the mouth of the Poudre Canyon, flows at 227 cubic feet per second, or CFS. The average discharge for April 9th, 2016 is about 80 CFS, according to Colorado Division of Water Resources. The peak runoff on the Poudre River usually hits in late May or early June. The average peak runoff is 2,928 CFS, according to the Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District. This harvest that we're talking about in those hot countries fell very early in the spring, probably between March and April. God chose this time that the miracle might be more glorious, more amazing, and terrible to the Canaanites, and that the Israelites would have plenty of comfortable provisions. The month of Nisan usually falls in March and April, according to the Gregorian calendar. Let's think about this. So how wide and deep was the Jordan River when the Israeli people crossed? Well, according to Richard Hess, the Tyndale commentary of the Old Testament, he states that the crossing of a turbulent river at flood stage would have been difficult and was most likely greater than 100 feet wide and greater than 10 feet deep. Now, this happened around 1406 BC. Todd Boland, who's the author of biblicalplaces.com, writes the following. In 1854, an expert swimmer was unable to make it across the river near Jericho because the river was too wide and the current too strong. So this kind of gives you a flavor of what the Israeli people were up against. Only God can get them across. In this instance, the priests carrying the ark had to be thinking that if we dropped this ark, they were dead. They knew better than me that the fast-flowing water could trip them up and kill them. For them to dare to step into the water with the Ark of God, not only demonstrated courage, it was a complete illustration of their faith, trust, and conviction. There was no way around. They had to cross the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan represent freedom from oppression. It was a breakthrough in deliverance. In Deuteronomy 30, verses 18 through 20, the Israelites were reaching the last leg of their journey through the wilderness en route to the Promised Land. What a familiar story this is with Peter climbing into the water to meet Jesus. He was fine until he took his eyes off of Jesus. When he sank into the water, Jesus latched onto Peter and picked him up. Jonah was another classic example of how he was thrown overboard from the ship that was in a deep storm. Yet God picked him up with a whale and made him think about it for a while before he actually put him on dry land to finish his mission. Or should we say God's plan? Remember when Elijah slapped the water with his robe to separate so he and Elisha could cross over? 2 Kings 2:8 says that then Elijah folded his cloak together and struck the water with it. The river divided, and the two of them went across on dry ground. The biblical accounts say that there were slightly over 600,000 men between 20 and 50 years old who crossed the Jordan River. Then we have to assume that there was an equal number of women of the same age and another million children and young people aged between infancy and age 20, male and female, plus another 500,000 at least, male and female over the age of 50. I would guess that there were almost 3 million people who crossed the Jordan. That's a long time to be standing in the water, holding this ark for people to cross over. The Jordan River was the setting for many events, such as John the Baptist, where he baptized people, including Jesus. Elisha told Naaman, the Syrian, to bathe in the Jordan to be healed of his leprosy. We see that in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 10. And then we have another great event where Elisha caused a sunken axe head to float on the Jordan River. Read that in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 1 through 6. It's an amazing story, but yet there's a lesson behind it. Right after they crossed the Jordan, Joshua is confronted with another great moment. These verses are better read than me trying to explain them because it spells it out very clearly. Here it says, when Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and demanded, "Are you a friend or foe?" This is a defining moment. I'm just pausing for a second because this person looks like another man with a sword. He didn't look like anything spectacular, but he was confronting him like, we've had enough today. I want to know if you're going to be a friend or not. Well, let me continue on with verse 14 and 15. It says, "Neither one," he replied. "I am the commander of the Lord's army." At this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in reverence. "I am at your command," Joshua said. "What do you want your servant to do?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did as he was told. Now, there's some dispute about whether this was actually an angel or was this Jesus appearing as a man? And was this God's presence? Well, let me say this. Angels do not transform the ground into holiness. Only God the Father, the Son of the Father, Jesus, could say such a thing. Jesus is the commander-in-chief. Joshua was talking to Jesus when he asked if he was a friend or a foe. Supporting this view is the fact that Joshua was to take off his sandals, similar to how Moses did at the burning bush when he met God in Exodus 3, verse 5. This was God the Son, a pre-incarnated appearance of Jesus Christ to Joshua. Notice that Joshua bowed down and worshiped him. Angels prohibited this because they were not God. Let's read the following verses as an illustration that validates angels' objection to being worshipped. The book of Revelations chapter 22 verses 8 and 9. It says, I, John, am the one who heard and saw all these things. And when I heard and saw them, I fell down to worship at the feet of the angel who showed them to me. But he said, No, don't worship me. I am a servant of God, just like you and your brothers the prophets, as well as all who obey what is written in this book. Worship only God. At this point, God was preparing Joshua with a strategic plan and how to take Jericho down. By this time, Joshua and his people were very confident that God would fulfill their mission of taking down Jericho. Just the very fact that they can walk across the Jordan on dry ground was enough proof to them that God would surely take charge and defeat Jericho. How sure are you about daring to step into the water? Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "There comes a time in your life when you have to look fear in the face and do the very thing you thought you could not do." If we stand on the principles of God, He will not fail us. The trouble is, we fail Him when we don't exercise our faith. Thomas Jefferson once said, "When it comes to principles, stand like a rock, but when it comes to opinions, flow like the river." In the book called Extreme Devotion by the Voice of the Martyrs, I read a story about Pastor Lee. Pastor Lee began his sermon, and then suddenly the doors of the house church burst open. Armed with officers of the Chinese Public Security Bureau, poured into the room, threatening everyone present, and grabbed Pastor Lee to arrest him. Lee told the officer to wait. He wanted to grab his bag. He was asked what was in the bag, and Lee ripped open the bag and showed them that he had a blanket and a spare change of clothes. He had been expecting to be arrested that day. Pastor Lee had been arrested many times before. Twice the police had beaten him to the point that he vomited blood, and one time his face was beaten with his own Bible. Lee was warned that police were watching the village where he held the Tuesday night meetings. He knew if he showed up to preach, he would be in prison. Chinese citizens could be sent to labor camps for up to 3 years without a formal trial. Of course, the risk was great, but Lee's bags were packed. In fact, more than having a bag packed, though, he had his mind and his heart prepared. He was willing to pay the cost to preach the gospel. He was convinced God would care for him, even in prison. We must prepare for the test of our testament by daily affirming that Christianity is worth it. It's worth spending our time in daily prayer. It's worth gathering to worship at church. It's worth enduring hardship and trial, abuse, and even arrest for the privilege of maintaining our commitment without compromise. I'll remind you what 1 Peter 4:12 says. Dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery trial you are going through, as if something strange were happening to you. In verse 13 he says, instead be very glad, for these trials make you partners with Christ in His suffering, so that you will have the wonderful joy of seeing His glory when it is revealed to all the world. That's the Word of God. Instead, let us step into the arena of faith and dare to be a Daniel, all alone in the lion's den. Dare to be a Gideon. Dare to be like Barak. Dare to be like Samson. Dare to be like David, Samuel, and all the other prophets. If you want to read how some of these people that we never heard of suffered in the Bible, take a look at Hebrews 11, verses 32 through 40, the story of martyrs. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own standing. Seek His will in all you do, and He will show you which path to take. 1 Peter 5:7 says, give all your worries and cares to God, for He cares about you. Are you willing to put your feet in the water? Get your feet wet. I encourage you. You're going to find great measures of faith and answers to your prayers. God bless you today.